Chapter 9. Kane and Abel. I read everything I can find about Kane on the internet, and then go to meet his manager, a dour woman with a sensible brown bob, in the lobby of the L'Ermitage Hotel. She escorts me up to the 7th floor without saying a word, leading me down a hall and opening up a room where Kane is waiting. Though not by anyone's standards attractive, Kane nonetheless radiates massive amounts of star quality. Or perhaps it's the gleaming diamonds in his ears and around his neck. He stands in the middle of the hotel bedroom in a white linen suit, wearing a beaming grin. Come in, he says, leading me through the room's sitting area and into the bedroom, then shutting the door. To his manager, he calls out, "Janet, we'll call you if we need you." Every now and then, you'll encounter a rep who insists on sitting in on the interview, which is about as nerve-wracking as the notion of a parent sitting in on an adolescent's date, but Janet just nods. I feel immensely relieved to be rid of the grim, personality-less manager. Kane settles his enormous frame onto the queen-size bed, his white boots dragging dirt onto the down comforter before patting the space next to him. "Come join me in bed, darling," he says, making the sentence seem less like a sexual come-on and more like a sensible suggestion. And truth be told, either one is fine by me. Getting a flirtatious rapport going with people I'm interviewing is one of my tricks of the trade. My other one is to confess intensely personal information to subconsciously motivate them to do the same. But it doesn't hurt my ego if a guy significant enough to be interviewed by Absolutely Fabulous is flirting with me. So I climb onto the bed willingly, just a tad nervous the dour manager will come in and catch me, the allegedly professional journalist in this compromising position. But I soothe my nerves about this by being extra vigilant with my questioning, and Kane compliments me on both my questions and my overall personality. Then again, at a certain point, it becomes clear that Kane is complimenting me on just about everything. The conversation is turning into something more akin to a date than an interview. "I don't have any brothers or sisters. Do you, beautiful?" He lobs back at my sibling query. And though I'm happy to answer him, I'm also quick to point out that Absolutely Fabulous readers don't give a rat's ass about the details of my life, so we might as well focus on him. "Look, don't worry so much about your article," Kane says reassuringly. "We'll make it great." "We haven't even talked about your first album yet," I protest. "Look, I have an idea," Kane suddenly says rather abruptly. "Why don't we finish this interview tomorrow at my house?" "Really?" I ask. Brian had told me that Kane didn't allow reporters there. Kane glances at the door and then back at me. "I just didn't want a whole slew of photographers traipsing through, but you could come," he says. "I think it would make your story a lot better." Glancing at him, lying on his back with his heel crossed over his knee and looking quite pleased with himself, I quickly weigh the pros and cons. Pro, I could impress Brian and the other editors that I was able to talk a source into an at-home interview. Con, he could be dangerous, but this is unlikely. Additional con, it's definitely possibly unprofessional. I think of Cynthia Jordan, an Absolutely Fabulous coworker who's so serious and by the book that she probably would have marched right out the hotel door and over to a sexual harassment complaint center if she'd received such an invitation. And then I think about how much I dislike Cynthia and how dull her life seems. "What time tomorrow?" I ask. 7 p.m., he answers quickly. And then, after glancing in the direction of the sitting room, he says, "Look, don't mention this to Janet. Why don't I just give you my address and we'll plan to see each other tomorrow?" After I say goodbye to Kane, a kiss on each cheek in front of a scowling Janet, I start to make my way through the lobby. I don't have to be back at work for the rest of the day, since Brian had suggested I go home after the interview and just start transcribing. And I feel a bit self-satisfied after scoring the follow-up at-home interview with Kane for tomorrow. It occurs to me that a screwdriver would taste good. As I walk up to the hotel bar, I wonder if Kane and I are going to fall in love and entertain other couples at dinner parties at our countryside estate or the house in Spain that he mentioned repeatedly during the interview. I picture us laughing about how we met back when I interviewed him for Absolutely Fabulous. I'm about to order when I feel a tap on my shoulder. "Well, if it isn't Amelia Stone," says the perfectly accented British voice belonging to Daniel Bromley. He grabs my hand, yes, grabs my hand, and gives me a kiss on each cheek. "Amelia, this is John Davis," Daniel says, motioning to a not at all cute grayish guy with a paunch. I shake John's hand as Daniel gestures for me to join them at the bar. Daniel orders a screwdriver for me, but before I can tell him that this is exactly what I was going to order, he says in that delightful British sardonic tone of his, "John may not look impressive, but he is." John smiles at Daniel good-naturedly. "Gee, thanks, Daniel. He's just way too American and not cute and a bit old for me to care about anything he has to say until he then remarks, 'You should hear how Daniel talks about people who don't sign his paychecks.'" I give John my friendliest smile. "It's true," Daniel shrugs and then winks at me. When a cheesy guy winks, it's cheesy. When a charming British guy winks, it's heart-meltingly adorable. John may seem down to earth. He is, after all, sitting here getting quite blotto with me, but don't be fooled. He's Chat's publisher. Publishers are never terribly interesting. I'd honestly rather lick paint than be invited to lunch with the absolutely fabulous publisher when he's in from New York. But they are the bank. "Are you in from New York, John?" I ask. Playfully, I add, "Or should I call you Mr. Davis?" John smiles and insists that I only and always call him by his first name, and then he launches into some story about the movie he watched on the plane coming out here. I notice that Daniel is observing my interaction with John approvingly, and suddenly I feel grateful for John's presence. Something I learned back in high school was that it's easier to make a guy like you if you can reel in his friends, or if you can perform your humor and flirt routine for a crowd. I'm always calmer with two people than I am with one anyway. Being alone with somebody tends to make me terrified that I'm going to run out of things to say. John talks about the movie he watched in his room here last night. This guy sure likes movies, and boy, can he ramble. While I think about how much more comfortable I am being around Daniel this time than I was when I first met him. I'm still wearing the attention I was getting from Kane like a protective coat, and I'm feeling like the very epitome of a sexy woman who has to fend off advances from her interview subjects on a regular basis. As if on cue, Daniel asks, "And what brings you to the L'Ermitage this afternoon?" I swear, he can make even dull questions sound charming. "I was interviewing a musician," I say. I glance around the bar area and determine that neither Kane nor his dour manager are in the vicinity. I lower my voice anyway and proceed to regale them with the story of my recent interview, complete with the bits about being invited into the bed and invitation to his house. "You are too much," Daniel exclaims, looking absolutely delighted. "You do realize that these things don't happen to normal people?" Since there's almost nothing I'd rather be less than normal, I feel utterly thrilled. "I hope you don't think I'm horribly unprofessional," I say. "Absolutely not," Daniel says. "You should use what you've got," John adds. I continue to revel in my impressive story and their reaction to it for the next 15 minutes as I finish my screwdriver. I'm dying for a cigarette and wonder if I can tell Daniel Bromley I smoke. Surely the British don't have the same close-minded attitude about cigarettes that overly health-conscious Americans do. But that's when he glances at his watch and tells me that, regretfully, he and John have to meet some advertisers for a drink across town in 20 minutes, and that they should probably be on their way. I love the way he says regretfully. It almost makes up for the fact that he's leaving. "Do you have a card on you?" he asks, and I feel my heart alight with delight. Then I realize that I ran out of cards a few weeks ago and still haven't gotten around to ordering more. "I don't," I say, "but why don't I write my information down?" He smiles and slides me a napkin and a ballpoint pen, and I write down my work number and email address. Then I add my cell phone and put a little X next to it. Subliminal message that will make him think of kissing when he looks at it, I think. The next day at work, I rush over to Brian's office to gloat about my follow-up interview with Kane, and he asks me when I'm going over there. 3:00. Even though I'm meeting Kane at 7, this answer just comes out of me, probably because I know that if I tell Brian the truth, he'll get the wrong idea. I make a mental note to leave the office at 2:30 to perpetuate this lie. Rather than saying anything, Brian just hands me a sheet of paper. An assignment to interview singer-songwriter Linda Lewis. Now, I'm a little too cynical to get my panties all in a twist over interviewing any celebrity. But from the moment I heard Linda Lewis's song Sinner on the radio on my way to work after a coke-fueled night, I felt inspired. It made me go from feeling somewhat suicidal to powerful, and right then I decided that Linda Lewis was going to be the next big thing. Of course, I've been convinced of that many times during my absolutely fabulous tenure, only to be ignored by the New York editors when I pitched the story. I often then watch the person become ridiculously famous and not be remotely interested in being profiled in Absolutely Fabulous or any magazine besides Vanity Fair. I'd also had my misses, people I declared were going to be the next Angelina Jolie or Steven Spielberg, who ended up barely causing a ripple. But I was always convinced that if Absolutely Fabulous had profiled them back when I suggested they should, those people would have been superstars too. Still, thank God for my ADD, I took the test and literally have it, but a mild case that doesn't conflict with my ability to live normally, according to the shrink. This means I don't get Ritalin, which is probably a good thing, based on what I've heard about how fun it is to chop up and snort. My point is, I'd pitched Linda Lewis to the New York editors ages ago and forgotten all about it. It's always shockingly wonderful when the New York editors approve one of my pitches, like finding $100 in the jeans that went out last year and you stopped wearing. I am so turning my work troubles around, I say to myself as I run from Brian's office back to my cubicle. I call Linda's publicist, Tina, immediately, and she screams with excitement when I say that Absolutely Fabulous wants to profile Linda. But she gasps when I explain the requirements of an Absolutely Fabulous profile. That she has to talk in some kind of detail about who she's dating and will print her age and check it with the DMV. Oh, Linda doesn't say her age, Tina says. She really thinks of age as just a number. Oh, God. Something I learned on my first story here is that it's the people whose ages we care about the most who think age is just a number. Can't you make an exception in this case, she asks. I tell her I don't know, but doubt it. Put her on hold, and then call Brian on the other line and say Linda's rep is kicking up a fuss about us printing Linda's age. Tell her if she doesn't want us to print the age, there won't be a piece. Returning to Tina's line, I repeat Brian's words. Tina sighs. Maybe Linda can be convinced, she says. I put her on hold and switch back to Brian. Maybe Linda can be convinced, I repeat. Brian says, if the publicist is hesitant now, we might be better off dropping this one. But Brian... You'll get another good assignment soon. Seriously, I just forget it. I hang up the phone and decide that Brian's wrong. Linda can be convinced and I can be the one to do it. I need to kick some ass at work and I just know this is the story that's going to allow me to do it. I call Tina and tell her we should just go ahead and schedule the interview and we'll work out the details later. My other line clicks in as I set a time to meet with Linda at her West Hollywood house. But I ignore it until I notice that the person is devil dialing me. That is letting the phone ring and ring, hanging up when they get voicemail and calling right back. I better see who's stalking me, I say to Tina. Thanks for everything. I hang up with her and answer the other line. Amelia, this is Amy Baker, Mark Stinson's publicist. With a start, I realize the Most Beautiful People issue is out today. I haven't even had a chance to see it. What's going on, Amy? I ask, but I can already tell something's wrong. Celebrity publicists only have two tones. Happy when you're doing the story on the client that never gets any press, and pissed the rest of the time. She's definitely giving me the latter. You're going to need to print a retraction on the piece, she says. You got Mark's weight and height wrong, and you completely misquoted his friend. She's speaking to me the way one would talk to a very small child or incredibly stupid adult, and I immediately start panicking. I'm always half convinced I'm screwing everything up and feel entirely vulnerable to this attack since I haven't seen the issue. Amy, let me just take a look at the piece and give you a call right back, I say, placing the phone down before I can even hear her objections. I rush over to Brian's office where the new issues are stacked, grab a copy, and sprint back to my cubicle. I can hear him asking, is everything okay? But I ignore him. Opening the issue to the page featuring Mark Stinson, man, is he not beautiful. I look at what we've listed as his height and weight and remember that he'd given me different numbers than the DMV had listed for him. I feel a rush of simultaneous redemption and outrage over having been accused of making a mistake when I didn't. And then I examine his friend's quote. He was a dork, just like the rest of us. And I know what happened without even having to call Amy back. The slightly scrawny and definitely short Mark Stinson opened up his issue of Absolutely Fabulous, excited to get his ego fed by relishing his placement in an issue with actual beautiful people, when he noted that his height and weight weren't the figures he gave me. Reading further, he saw his friend's quote, and rather than laughing at it the way any person with normal self-esteem would, he got pissed, called the friend to vent, and the friend claimed he'd been misquoted. I call Amy back and explain the mix-up about Mark's weight and height and assure her that I have the tape with Mark's old friend's quote. Even though I know I'm right, I'm semi-hysterical and feeling guilty over Amy's accusation, kind of like how I always feel guilty like I've stolen something whenever I see a sign in a store that says they prosecute shoplifters. And being right while feeling guilty is never a good combination for me. If you'd like to avoid these types of exchanges in the future, I'd advise you to tell your clients to be honest when they're being interviewed and not pass on the phone numbers of friends whose quotes they're going to question once they're in print, I say. Excuse me? Amy says after a hostile pause. Are you trying to tell me how to do my job? The fact that she's getting snippy with me rather than apologizing for accusing me of making mistakes when I hadn't pisses me off even more. It seems like in this case, you need to be told, I snap back. Jesus Christ, she says, and just as my blood starts pumping for a real knockdown, drag-out fight, she slams the phone down, and I'm left hanging. I'm always so surprised when I get hung up on that I'm usually still holding the phone by like the fifth time that computerized female voice informs me that I should hang up and try again. I'm tempted to devil dial Amy right back to yell at her for hanging up on me, but part of me knows I've just done something terribly wrong. Everyone who does celebrity journalism understands that personal publicists in Hollywood are insane and that the important thing is to act like they're not. Brian told me this on my second day at work after a publicist called and yelled at me for telling him that a back-of-the-book story was going to be a cover story, even though I'd never said that. Would you let a crazy woman yelling at you on the bus make you cry? Brian asked at the time, and I shook my head, even though this fictional crazy woman probably would make me cry. And anyone who has to ride the bus in LA should surely be continuously crying anyway. Still holding the phone, tears start to stream out of my eyes. This seems weird since I'm the one who won this fight. I decide to pull it together and not go running to Brian and tell him about what a crazy bitch Amy was to me. So I spend the rest of my time at the office that day blasting Kane's and Linda Lewis's music from my computer CD player and thinking about how it's a shame that Amy Baker doesn't understand how important I am. She clearly doesn't know that I hang out with renowned British magazine editors and am invited into the homes of extremely famous musicians even when they've already denied the magazine that right. She'll get it one day, I tell myself, picturing her sitting with Mark Stinson and opening up an issue of Absolutely Fabulous where Kane and I are announcing our engagement.